see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
What unites people? Armies, gold, flags, stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it.
If you want to stand out from everybody else, you need to get into storytelling.
Draw a different frame around the same set of circumstances and new pathways come into view.
Welcome to Artifact Live, with me, Scott MacArthur, where we look at the art and science of story. We don't care who you are, whether you're a bricklayer, a professor or a speaker, all we care about is you being a good storyteller.
Thank God the dramas arrived.
It's time to realise that facts tell, but it's stories that sell.
Get me some nasty and get it now or someone's getting shot.
And that's a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche. 1,000 comments.
Selling a hemorrhoid cream to someone who's got hemorrhoids.
Got a whip.
I was born into a deep contradiction.
This stuff's magic.
God, that's so clever.
I was standing on a stage I was a very small stage. I think there were about 50 people, so it sounds like it wasn't an auditorium at all. Yes. It was Boulder, Colorado, and I was introduced that evening as the first words that came out of the introducer's mouth was, "This is Nic, and he's a storyteller." And I took umbrage to that. And I didn't know why, but it felt strange to be a bit kind of riled on stage. I don't usually get riled at pretty much anything.
Yes.
I don't react to much. But I thought I'd do the person the honor of trying to work it out right there and then. Why does that, why is calling me a storyteller? Why didn't it seem true? And I know that most of my films, certainly up until then, had seemed like stories because stories were what came out. But actually it points right to the heart of the way of it, which is the opposite to how most people would go about interview or extracting a story from someone. And I mean, the long or the short of it is I'd never look for a story. I'm looking for the experience essentially of the interior world of that person. And that sometimes doesn't even have words. And if I go there, then where the words come from is a very, very different place. And that's what I was, so that's what I was trying to work out. This was probably 12 years ago or something like that. And to give you a good physical example of this, and some of it may ring true because there are stories and there are stories. Sometimes someone tells a story, and for some reason it's intoxicating. Yeah. You're hanging on every word. You're totally what people might term present, and it's like there's nothing else.
Yes.
But more often than not, that's not the case. Someone's telling a story. They've told it 1,000 times. The words have lost their charge. There's no, I suppose one way of saying it is there was no energy in it. I noticed what that's about. And through the process of, nearly 2 decades of essentially filming this human soul, or should I say exactly filming the human soul, because that's what I've been up to for a very long time, I realized what was going on or what was not going on to make that occur, to have that feeling. And to give you a quite quite a stark example. I remember filming in some place once. I wasn't meant to film. I was asked to go somewhere. It was actually a leadership institute, a philanthropic leadership institute, and they'd asked me to really go along and have a look at the nature of what they were doing and give some sense of, I suppose, my view on it. And on the last day, someone said, or the person who was running it said, "Could you film, Nick?" And I happened to have my cameras there. And by film, I mean, what I do is I'm essentially, if you're looking from the outside, it looks like I'm interviewing someone. But I'm doing the opposite. Everything here is the opposite, by the way. What I'm going to tell you and why I call it challenging is it's the opposite. So I set up, and what I do is someone would sit with me, probably just a meter and a half away. We're close. We're going to be, if we're going to talk at all, we're going to talk about intimate things that generally haven't yet been said. And I broadcast the image out of the camera onto large screens, so everyone sees what I see, and I think that is terribly important.
That's lovely.
So, because otherwise what you are is you're a fly on the wall. You're looking in from the side. And so you're not really a part of the conversation. You're like a voyeur in the conversation. And that's how I make my films. So I film, almost like we got it set up here. I'm right down the side of the camera, so the viewer is included in this experience of someone. They're not looking in from the side. And so that's how I had it set up. And then goes out the invitation. There were probably about 20 people in the room. It was towards the end of their time together. And I thought, well, maybe no one will want to take this strange invitation up. But everyone did in the end. But the first person really characterizes the way of this. And really, maybe even the answer to where the words come from, which I've noticed so vividly over the many years. Person walks up, sits in the chair, as you'd imagine. In fact, I think he kind of had a spring in his step when he came to the chair. If there's an invitation out, it's like you feel, you know what, I've got something interesting to say. I've got a contribution for the audience, for the world even. And he sits there and starts to talk. But I know where those words have come from. Because most of the words that are ever said have some almost need attached to them. They just do. Often the need is, I want to contribute to the world. I want to help you. I want to help you get to where you want to go. I want to help you resolve this issue. I want to make you feel good. Or they might be the other way as well. I want the world to give something to me. And so most of the nature of most human encounters are that. It seems a little of a dark view on it, but I think that's what it is. We all need something. And so we're in the world trying to get somewhere, and often our words are in service to that. I know that because I've noticed what words used to come back to me in the camera, and I used to sit with those words, and I used to film a lot of famous people in the early days, especially when I was in London. And I used to watch those edits back and think, wow, there's a very dramatic story here. But that story has been told for a reason. And I noticed how I felt, and it was almost flat. Yet I would film someone else, and it was intoxicating, yet they were talking about pretty much nothing, and no one had ever heard of them. What's that about? And I started to notice the nature of it. And so this person walked up to the chair, sat in the chair, and started to talk. And I had to say, you know what, I've just learned that in my style, I like to start in a different way. And he goes, what do you mean? And I say, I generally like to start from nothing, no thing. No act, no word, no thing. No need to do anything, no need to contribute to us, to the world, to anything. So all you have to do is simply sit there, maybe close your eyes, because I love getting the shot of someone with their eyes closed. There's something about it. I love to take a lot of portrait photographs as well. It slows the world down. In fact, this way actually stops the world. because what happens is someone suddenly, consciously or unconsciously, realizes, well, there's someone here who doesn't need me to be a certain way. He's just told me that even if I don't speak, say a single word, that's enough, which is, the heart ready of my invitation. And I believe it to be true. I'm quite happy just simply sitting with someone. In fact, if we just sat here for a while, for the rest of the time and said nothing, that would be, to some, it would be awful. Just like, what's the point in using this time of mine if it's not going to help me get somewhere? For many, it might be a blessed relief. It's like, oh God, nothing.
Interesting. I've got quite a few things that I'd like to unpack a little bit from what you've said, just so I understand. And you talk about the soul. I mean, one of your film series is called Soul Biographies, and it's where I first came across your work, Nic. I think I've said that to you before. And what do you mean by the soul?
Strangely, I'm not sure I've ever defined the soul. I don't define many things here because I think it's utterly mysterious. All of it is. Yet we know it when we experience it.
Yes.
What I'm really talking about is this inner world, this world that goes on. It's almost like in another plane, yet we live it all the time. Mm-hmm. So if I go back to this story of this person in the chair, what happened is, instead of marching up to the chair and saying these words in this way, which would have given us a real indication of what he'd been up to in the world. And it turned out he was a US congressman. And he it seemed like a good opportunity to talk about, contribution and service and whatever. And I think I know how those words would have been. They would have been interesting. They might even have been inspiring in some ways. But what came when we started with no thing was a voice from a different place. Mm-hmm. So instead of this person, this film subject, talking to me or at me, like so many of us do to each other much of the time, instead of them talking to or at me, it was like they were being spoken, like the words were coming through. And I do mean that in a strange way. It was like he was being spoken through.
Yeah.
And so the whereabouts of those words was somewhere very different. And to me, I've done this so much. I mean, day in, day out for, as I said, nearly 2 decades. I've noticed this. Where the words come from are different. They feel different. The nature of them is different. Everyone, I've filmed so many people, thousands of people. And the characterization of this is, one, people lose sense of time because they're not tracking time. Mm-hmm. 2, they actually lose sense of the words or memory of the words. They don't quite remember. They just remember how they feel when they said them. But it's almost like they're stumbling through their sentences without stumbling. It's like you started a sentence. I have no idea what's going to be on this side of the full stop, let alone the far side. And so now those words are bristling with this charge. And yes, so often a story is being told, but it's almost like a story is being told from a very different place. This interior world, not this exterior world of pretend that we often always play, like, here's a chap called Nic, he's a this, he's a that, he's done this, he's done that, to give you a real sense of someone that I want you to see. Mm-hmm. What I'm doing is I'm unknowingly revealing myself utterly, with nothing in the way, no sense of wall, no sense of guarding my words. It's just unbridled authenticity in a way. Yes. There's nothing there's nothing holding this back, almost like I'm not even saying the words. What happens, and what happened in that instance, it was extraordinary. Like, these words moved, I think, everyone in the room to tears, because it was an articulation of a life of service that had never been said before, because of where it had come from. And so what I've recognized in storytelling is so much of storytelling has a specific point to move the world to somewhere that the storyteller presumes it should be or could be. But storytelling, when one lets go and is simply spoken, you're in the moment or whatever. In other words, you're not in control.
Yes.
Has a very different quality. And what is revealed about that person is something different. I would call it the soul. I call the way, although I'm very careful about the process, because I know the process is nothing, is to let go of everything. But I call it inner view because I'm essentially catching an inner view of a person. And that, to me, feels a certain way. There's just this bristling experience of interconnectivity. Like I'm the same. And that's what people feel or can feel if they would pay attention to the films I make or the experience in a room, whether it's a small stage or a big stage or a room with 10 people in or a auditorium with 1,000 people in. There comes a point where you're paying attention, and this experience of someone is their interior landscape. That's what you're seeing, and that draws you in to a place where there's nothing between you. And you can't necessarily describe it, but you know it. And it's kind of haunting. And that's what I would probably call the soul. You've had this experience of someone. It feels like you belong to each other almost, and you don't know why. You can't even remember necessarily what the person was saying or what, if you were talking to them, what you were talking about. But it doesn't matter. Like we met last week, for a pre-chat or whatever. I remember I remember what it felt like to be with you. It was great. It was like, oh, I'm so looking forward to this time to continue this adventure. And I know I said I would start to talk about, these lessons, but I'm kind of bored with the lessons. I'd rather just, it's so dull for someone to be looking and going, well, what can I get from this time? Because when you do that, all you're doing is looking on the horizon. You're not paying attention. You're thinking, well, what's in it for me? What can I learn here that will make something called the future better? Whereas we could just not do that. We could just make it up.
I love it. And I said this to you once before. It's so counter what the perceived wisdom is with lots of things. So, for example, even doing this show, everyone out there, not everyone, but nearly everyone out there says it's got to have agency. It's got to solve a problem. It's got to be like a search engine. It's got to solve, inspire them. It's got to give them tools. It's got to, and if you look at the vlog and to some extent the podcast landscape, it's full of that, and I find it really boring. I find I don't like you. You pick up a book and it's 7 steps to this and 5 steps, and it's like, oh God, that's the first thing. But the second thing that really intrigues me about your work, and it has done for ages, as I said to you when we were doing the pre-brief, that when I was a kid, I was introduced to the beat poets, the Scottish one, which was Hugh McDermott, and then that led me into sort of Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and that school of, poetry. And most of that was done as what they called a stream of consciousness. They didn't sit down with a plan. They didn't sit down with a structure. They just let it come, often with turned up to 12 using, some psilocybin or whatever, but they were, that's what they did. And I am just over there. I've got Jack Kerouac's original script for On the Road, and it's one sentence. The whole book is one sentence. And I've often thought about that and how he got to that. Is that related to, because I think that came from his soul. I mean, it's all over the place at times, but there's something incredibly beautiful about it. I absolutely adore it. It's one of my favorite books. Is that similar? Or is that a different thing altogether, Nick? Am I coming at it from the wrong sort of?
No, it is exactly the same.
Right. Okay.
So when I mentioned at the beginning, or the title of this, where do words come from? It's far more profound than where do words come from.
Yeah.
So where does everything come from? That's the question.
Yeah.
When I picked up a camera for the very first time, it came from nowhere. It came from nowhere. I was sitting and I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't pretty much doing anything. I was sitting in a hotel in the middle of London, and there was nothing, and there was nothing, and there was nothing, and there was more nothing, and then there was something.
Yes.
And it didn't come from any physical stimulus.
Yes.
It wasn't provoked by the view of something or the thought of something. It just came, and I followed it. But more importantly than that, I realized that the very way of filming, of the way of paying attention to someone, the way of talking, was exactly the same. It doesn't come from a response to something. It comes from nothing. One of the very first films I made was actually on quantum physics, strangely, and I called it Something from Nothing, because that's the nature of what they've seen when they go back and they go back and they go back and they look further and further and further, and then they suddenly say, well, there's nothing and we can't explain it. But it doesn't need to be explained. Not everything needs to be explained. You can... that was an amazing thought that I had years ago, which took me totally off the hook. Whether I can explain this great mystery or not, it's still going to work the same. So I'm off the hook for having to understand it or explain it. I can just be in it. So subsequently, a few years later, I wrote this poem, and it probably took me a decade to work out, oh, there's something to that. It was called The Tree of Dreams. I'll read it to you, actually, if I can find it. All right, here you go. It's called The Tree of Dreams. It said, many had gathered under the Tree of Dreams. All but one stood shaking its branches for dreams to fall. Dreams that had been whispered to them by the voices of others. Dreams that would fade with time. But one sat quietly, waiting for a dream to recognize his soul and to consume him with no doubt. And so where does it come from? Where do your dreams come from? Where do your words come from? Where does life itself come from? So my observation in these many years has been that most people, most of the time, are living their lives to become something. Like the human experience really seems to be an experience of becoming, driven by this sense that we're not quite enough. And it's exhausting. It's perpetual. It never ends.
Yes.
It never ends. And there's no peace. And so you're always driving. I'll do this because. So, many watching this perhaps might be thinking, well, I'll watch this so I might discover something to help me on my way. That's why the podcast world and the human world is pretty much full of features and benefits. Work out what people want and tell them you can give it to them.
Yeah.
Very little is done, or not enough is done, out of a stream of consciousness. You do it just because. I don't know. The sky told me. The ether told me. That's how I run nearly everything. The ether told me. Whatever, I don't know what to call it even. It's just a sense of something. It didn't come from a need to have this change or that change. I just knew. And I don't know how I knew.
Yeah.
But I know the experience of knowing. I know it very, very well. Actually, I don't always attend to what I know. I sometimes try not to. But what if you could what if you could live a life like that? What if you could let someone speak from there? I mean, that's the art of witnessing as I see my interview thing. It's like, my job is not to really ever ask a question unless it absolutely seems like I should. Mainly it's just about not even being there. I'm not even the witness. The witness is the ether. Sometimes space and nothing is the most extraordinary thing. And what if great stories come from this place? What if the only way that you can really experience another person is from that? Because otherwise, everything that you experience of someone is a conclusion of them. I'm looking at you, and I've just made all these assumptions about all sorts of things, the things in the background, the things that you emailed me, the things that I managed to glean online, your accent, the look of you. It's like, it's exhausting. By the time I get to see you through all those things and all the needs that I have, you're a conclusion. Or I could do none of that, and I could just let the experience of you come to me. And
do you know, if I can interrupt just for one very short question, have you ever done this with children?
Yes. I just put a film up on Monday, and it's not a film, it's photographs. And there's something about it. I had set out to catch the soul of America. It was a big job.
Gosh.
It does have one. I haven't finished, nowhere near finished, but I know where it is. I know where the soul is of everyone. If you don't look, there it is. The very act of looking actually seems to send it away. But I was in a third grade, which is 10-year-olds class in Tucson, Arizona. And it was 100, I think it might have been 120 degrees outside, which is irrelevant inside apart from the fact the air conditioning was so loud that I couldn't really film because I couldn't scrub that audio piece out.
Yes.
So in the end, we were together for a couple of hours, and I said, look, I think I'd just love to take your photographs. And it was amazing, it was so full of energy. And I looked at those portraits the other day, and I realized I can't stop looking at them. There's something about in the eyes of those particular kids. And so I recorded some guitar and stuck it up on Monday. It's kind of intoxicating in a way. It's a slideshow film, I guess, not a real film. So no real dialogue. Well, no dialogue at all, actually. So yes, I've done it with children, and I've filmed kids in other stages as well, and they tend to be much closer to the surface. So you don't need to, because this is what we're talking about here, is undirected. So the thing that gets in the way is you assume that you need to do it in a certain way to get to a certain place. But what if you didn't have that? What if that wasn't in the way? And anyone's capable of it. So child or not. I mean, age probably dampens one's closeness to it, one's capacity for it. And then you lose sight of it maybe, but in any moment, the flick of a single heartbeat, you're there. I've experienced that. I've filmed a multiple murderer in jail. Same look in his eyes than a modern day saint. It's there. It's just covered, but the thing is, this experience is there. It doesn't need to be conjured up. I've learned that. I think that's, in fact, that's probably the most profound thing I noticed over all these years. That there's this journey in life, and everyone is just trying to feel good, and whatever that means. I just want to feel like life isn't so fractious. There's not that. I don't want to live a life that just feels like there's no peace. always fighting it, always, sometimes it feels good and then it feels terrible, and I'm not in control of it, and I want to be in control of it, and I want it to seem like I've lived a good life, and I want to achieve all the things that people have told me I ought to achieve, and I look out at the world, and the world tells me I'm not quite enough, and I could be there, and I could reach higher, and I could be over there, and with this and that, and there feels a lot of pressure, so there's no peace. So I just want peace. I just want peace. What I've noticed about the experience of peace is that there's nothing that one has to do for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the opposite way round. And so, if one, well, just in a moment, you can recognize that, and you recognize it not because you did something special to conjure it up and make it happen, but just because it was your natural state. It was just there.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the events I do are just about that one thing, really. Just a surrender. In other words, a giving up of all the things that you think you should be doing and ways you ought to be and things you could get better at, all that. What if you just start with nothing? What if you sit in front of the camera and let go of it all without it even being a thing, that an act of letting go.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do.
Mm-hmm.
From there, you're basically in a stream of consciousness, because it is mysterious, but that is there all the time. It doesn't need anything. It's just there. And, when you approach storytelling, as, we were talking about, the most extraordinary experience of people and words that form into stories, the articulation of the most extraordinary things that happened, come from that place.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we seem to try and be in control of it so much. And I guess a lot of storytelling actually, without being too rude about it, is probably propaganda in a way. In other words, maybe propaganda / advertising. In other words, I'm going to tell you a story so that you think something that I want you to think about me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you what I think you need to hear in order for you to, I don't know, ... fill in the benefit.
Yeah.
It's so tedious, and it's always, in a way, it's terribly dishonest as well. There's a real dishonesty in our relationships with each other, or there can be.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly there's not. And suddenly, when you don't hold anything up, and you're not doing everything for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
you're doing it just because, then it feels different.
I remember watching or listening to Krista Tippett talking, the On Being show. I'm sure you know On Being.
I know, I know. She, my father-in-law built her offices. They're just down the way. They're about a mile.
I was going to say they're
the
local
house.
to you, yeah. And Krista does something like that. I mean, one of our guests, it's not attributable, and so I'm sorry, I can't attribute it, but one of our guests said of Krista, she said, you know what? Listening is like touching at a distance. And I remember when I first heard that, and I thought, because everyone talks about, don't they, again, putting the armor back on, the corporate stuff back on. Listening skills are really important, and you've got to demonstrate understanding, and you'll eventually gain some empathy. And there's almost like a scaffolding around that. But Krista never does that. Krista will do a bit like what you do, actually. I think she will give them. It's not the same. You give them nothing, and I understand that. She gives them perhaps what I would call a generative questions. She starts all her shows with, regardless of whether you're of a person of faith or not, what was, or was there a spiritual aspect to your growing up? That's all she says. And more than half of her audience, guests rather, are atheists. They're not. She's a theologian, but more than half of her audience are not. They're scientists, they're poets, they're engineers, from all different walks of life. And that means that, and she just leaves them alone. She lets them talk.
And I think it's a stunning podcast because it never goes down. There's that little bee in the bang, it's a bit wanky to say, but it's a bit like that. It gets them going, Nick, but then she just lets them go and she just sits back and it feels very, very intimate. And in fact, when you see it on YouTube, because she does film quite a few of her episodes, you can see her reacting to those words. She's open to that. She's not thinking, I need to get a story out of this person that's going to sell this product. I need to get a story out of this person that's going to sell their, and it's beautiful. That's the way. If anyone ever asks me about it, I say, it's just beautiful. Just listen to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never heard Krista's style described as you're describing it. Strange. Her kids went to the same school as our kids, and we were just behind. And
yeah.
I know she's a friend of my father-in-law's. I've never met her actually. So I really ought to go down and meet her. But she has a way with her.
Yeah.
In fact, I wrote a little piece which is quite indicative of this way, and I want to read it and then listen to it myself and think about what you said about how she does it. And this is, I wrote it a long time ago and realized that, this kind of, it really describes what I call interview, but witnessing, this ability to pay attention to someone. And it's called undivided and so still attention. Before your words of encouragement and well-timed advice, before items gifted at beyond an arm's length, did you ever consider the one thing that might turn the entire world on its axis? Your undivided and so still attention. And really, I suppose, what I recognize this nothing thing being is there's nothing needed. Just speak into the sky. Just follow your words. I'm not going to try to work you out. I'm not going to try to do anything with it unless I really feel like I ought to. And, my style is, I suppose, sitting very still with someone and I just know that this is enough. And from nothing comes something. And even if no words are said, it doesn't mean nothing's coming. I've had people sit in front of the camera for an hour and 47 minutes with a large audience watching, is the record. Not that I'm counting. It sounds like I am. But often people will sit for long periods of time with no words. But of course, the experience of life is reaching everyone. Of course, there's something going on.
Yes.
And I suppose Krista must have this extraordinary capacity to what you call be present with someone, to not get in the way, to remove the pressure that is so often exerted on someone unconsciously. Because we all feel it. If someone's there and you're feeling the pressure to do a good job, to tell a good story, the words come from this fearful place, this place of pre-construction almost.
Yeah.
And I'm never looking for this place of pre-construction if I can help it. I don't even mind, like people often ask, well, what's your favorite film? I say, I don't really have one. And they go, surely you must like the joyful ones as opposed to the opposite. And I go, no, I've made films of people who have lost children, sometimes in violent circumstance. They're most extraordinary when you've given the space for someone to just speak and not know where it's going to go, and yet still hold with it, and they're totally desolate, and there may be no way out, and they've just realized that. That's the most haunting experience. I would prefer that than a made-up happy experience. Someone holding a smile on their face.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this kind of bristling authenticity and Krista's, I don't often listen to it, but I heard one with John O'Donoghue, the poet.
Yeah,
I've listened to that many times. There's something about it, and you hardly hear her speak, I think, and I think that's probably how she does it. She just, I always feel you nothing's required. When someone's off talking from a deep space, it's an explorative space on their part. They don't know what they're going to say. They don't know where it's going to go. They're just speaking. They're not looking down a checklist of, this is the direction I'm going to go. They're off-piste, totally off-piste.
Yeah.
There's no path through this conversation. Those are original. Those are the things that you know, I think that's probably when you said the beatnik poets, you know, whatever they're called, the beat poets, Jack Kerouac and stuff, stream of consciousness. That's it. That's liberation.
Yeah.
You know, now what if one's life could be like that?
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure many people,
yeah,
you know, even kind of colliding with this conversation between us would be thinking, wow, you know, dare I? But you have to lose control.
Yes. I think the word that's just popped into my head is courage. Because why? Because I don't really know why. Because I think, well, let me think. It probably, and I'm talking probably coming from my own perspective here rather than trying to anything else. I've often felt, certainly when I was in the corporate world, Nick, I didn't have the courage to really take control of myself. I think I'm perhaps mirroring something you said earlier, but I would, you know, get into the job, perform in the job. There's the job description, you know, then get promoted, and be in charge. And all I would do would be push the same crap out that everyone else had done successfully over decades and had good careers. But I know 15 years ago, I became like a tire on a bicycle. The tread had gone. I just wasn't interested anymore. And I couldn't get enthusiastic about another project, doing the same thing that I'd done 10 times before. It didn't matter if it was glamorous, you know, it might have been in Sydney or Beijing or whatever. And I was like, oh God, here we go again. And I had to leave. And I think that how you've described what you do has reminded me of that was like what John O'Donoghue would call a threshold moment. You know, I had a choice to make, and I thought, bugger it, I'm not doing what they want me to do, and I left.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
I did. I think I made life up from this stream of consciousness in the beginning, early on.
Yeah.
Like I was an explorer of sorts.
Yeah.
I crossed the Sahara at 17, 18 years old. Canoed the Congo, canoed the Amazon, traveled the world, climbed mountains, just made stuff up. And then I fell into business. It seemed like I was never very serious about it. Mm-hmm. Ended up as managing director of a company called Mintel, or one of the Mintel companies. You know, everyone thought we were a really big company, but we weren't. Not that time, it is now. And I couldn't work out why. In fact, I said no many times, but they just kept on asking again, would you do it? And so I did it. And it was a good job, but just not for me. And I had to stop in the end. And I realized that in the absence of not knowing what to do, I couldn't do the same thing, because I didn't know this, but I would never be struck by this notion of something from the ether. This thing that I didn't construct, it found me. And that was really the way around. You know, where do words come from? Yeah. Well, they come from me talking to you or at you, at the audience, or they just come. Mm-hmm. Where does your sense of life come from? Direction, sense of aliveness. I'm not even sure about purpose, to be honest. But where does the sense of it come from? Does it come from the construction of what you've seen and you've worked out and you think would be a good thing? Or does it just come? Does it just arrive and you know, and you get to a threshold moment all the time, really, and or much of the time, yet you don't do anything about it for fear of what might happen. Mm-hmm. But they, you know, so I guess there comes a point sometimes where you just think, those two, it just wasn't working, and you couldn't work out why. So now you change something. But I'm not sure anyone doesn't collide with those things all the time. Often, I suppose, when I stick a camera up, that's the opportunity that I could catch on film.
Yes.
Is an opportunity where someone has just given up trying to explain away anything. Actually, even given up looking. Because I'm sure that something a 13th century mystic poet once said, Rumi, was his name. He said something like, "What you seek is seeking you." I know that's my experience, but it also, when I start to think about it, it's always there, just kind of silently, patiently waiting. But you have no real chance of catching a glimpse of that, catching a sense of that, if you're so busy.
Yeah.
Trying to get somewhere. So slowing down is no good. Stopping dead is good in that respect. Like the removal of everything that needs to be done is an extraordinary thing, and it's almost in a moment of no time that's realized, and it's when you realize it and you suddenly become aware of it. Now something can happen with it. And so, what Krista does in her interviews on being, I suppose, I would imagine a lot of the interviewees are actually probably struck by their performance almost. Like, wow, I felt I was free when I was doing that, and I wonder why. Because I've been interviewed many times, but the interview always has a list of 10 questions, and it's kind of waiting to ask the next question, and is wondering whether what I'm saying will be received well, all that kind of thing. So much like most of life is, just kind of, you're in control of it. Maybe that's the thing. Let go of the control.
The control. I think looking back on where I encountered this, I had like a fish hook in my mouth, and that was money, because I grew up in a council estate outside Glasgow. Any minute we were on the street. I mean, it was mum and dad did their best. I'm not saying they didn't do their best. They did their best, but we were always that away from trouble. And I think that fish hook I think it probably still does pull on me that, I'm only one mistake away from nothing again, and I think it took me a long time, and I don't know if I'm there yet, if I'm absolutely honest, Nick, to remove that fish hook. It's going to hurt, but it's kind of, it's there, and it has an impact on me all the time. And I've only ever mentioned that once ever. Not that metaphor. I've never used that metaphor in my life before, but I remember once, and I'll keep this very brief. I was in a forest with my friend Julian, and we do this every year or so. We go and we build a fire, and we just sit and talk and meditate and listen to the forest. And that's the only other time I've had that thought. You've just made me think of it. And honestly, that is the first time I've used that metaphor. But I think that moment of realization, what's actually behind where you're trying to go, is hard to find. At least I found it hard to find. Maybe not everyone else, but I did. And it's still there. If that makes sense. But I'm feeling almost hesitant to ask you the next question, Nick. That's interesting. I've never felt that again in one of these. Normally, I end this show, because we're coming to our time. I ask my guests to bring an artifact along with them, that they can tell a story about. Do you still want to do that for me?
Well, I have. I mean, you did ask, and I have a couple of things, but I'm more fascinated by what you just said.
Right.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by what it must have been like, growing up on the edge.
Yeah.
And then I was just thinking, wow, you went and you listened to the forest. Who does that? Probably everyone should. So what you're really listening to is something, a different voice. And then I was just wondering, it's like, wow, you said, and I can see this, and I just like this sitting on the edge of it all falling apart and losing everything. Always sounds like such a terrible thing, and I know that, but I suddenly wondered whether it's not, whether it's the opposite. What if that is the thing that like makes you feel? I don't know. I just suddenly
Could be.
it's kind of really interesting.
I mean, I tell you the consequence of that, not on me, but certainly on my family. My dad to this day consistently says to me, "I still don't know what you do," and I consistently respond to him, "Neither do I." I was expected to go into the metal industry, into Gartcosh or Ravenscraig, the heavy engineering world, or onto boats, because most of my family are from the Navy or fishing stock, and I didn't do either of those things. And I think that you'd have to ask my dad, and my mum, but I think to this day they still don't understand, because there was an expectation, I guess, Nick, for me to go in a particular direction, which I didn't do, largely because I had a very good grandfather, a mentor, who said to me, do what you want, find what you want to do and do it, which was great advice to a 15-year-old growing up in a council estate outside Glasgow. It really helped. But it's interesting what you just said, and maybe it is the driver. I've not thought of it like that. I've almost thought about it, I think the pain aspect, I think that's where that hook thing probably came from, because as I said, I've never used that before. So maybe taking the hook out is too painful. Maybe that's it, but maybe I'm just bullshitting. I don't know.
But the way to wonder about that is space and time. This is how, if you were sitting in front of the camera, which I suppose you are, not that we got the time and latitude for this, but it wouldn't even be to ask a question of that. He'd say, well, what would be best now? It's like, well, nothing, no thing, no act, no wondering about it, no trying to work it out, no trying to tell a story. What if we just kind of sat here with this?
That's wonderful, Nick.
That's where it comes from. That's where this magical quality of the inner world comes from, in a just a moment of nothing almost. And I know we haven't got the latitude to explore it. It's a shame we didn't get here earlier, really.
Yeah.
I suppose we're so, you think that what fools, eh? We think the word podcast and we think we need to fill it with words. And I suppose they're interesting in a way, and there might be something, but really,
I mean, even that is something that frustrates the hell out of me sometimes, and I'm talking about myself, because I certainly, if you look back, I mean, I think this is episode 62 of this, and I've been so fortunate. The guests have been amazing. It's been unbelievably fantastic experience. But at the beginning, for the first 10 episodes, I spoke too much. And I learned quite quickly that I wasn't doing the Krista Tippett thing. I wasn't trying to copy Krista because I couldn't, but I thought, wait a minute, Krista doesn't talk very much. She lets the guests talk, and I stopped talking. And it got better as a consequence of that. And I think, but that was hard for me. It really was hard. I'm one of these people that if there's a silence, I want to fill it. At least I used to be. It'd be funny what people think when they watch this, because a lot of the guests know me quite well, so let people know me quite well.
You just got into an observation there. So,
Yeah.
Krista starts with something, sets on fire, they talk, it fills the podcast.
That's it.
Much like you've asked a few things, I've talked, but if I'm being honest, my real sense of some of this time is like, God, I'm bored of talking. Like, I don't mean bored of us.
No, I know you don't. I know you don't. No.
I suddenly got this yearning for like, well, what if it was both of us doing that? What if it was not filled with so many words? What if it was filled with a lot of space between, it was finally getting there. You said something, or I might have also gone to say something, and I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
Then there's space. That's useful for everyone, I think, because it's so unusual. And it's a thing that is a great contribution, is really quite simple. The space.
So little of it at the moment, it's unbelievable.
Well, no, but there's the same amount of time there always was. It's always a choice. I live a very quiet life in a way. I live almost an entirely interior life.
Yes.
Well, not entirely interior. It's busy here where I live and stuff. But there's that inner world stuff is always there. It's always going on. It's kind of running the show, really. And it doesn't seem to have many opportunities to come out and articulate itself. Maybe it doesn't even need to. But to notice that it's there, and to notice that it has it got a voice. It's got a sense to it, and that sense it leads you somewhere. What you seek is seeking you. So it was the other way round. So instead of pushing your way through life in this kind of muscular way that is always trying to get to over there, and sort of you've worked out that someone told you should, and maybe you should be a bit more original. But what if life itself was trying to live itself through you, as opposed to it was your life and you're the one to live it to its max or to its best? What if that wasn't your part in the equation? I suppose that would be, in a sense, a life of faith without any, sense of dogmatic anything, religion or anything. Just a life of, wow, I can talk like I could write an essay in a single sentence with no punctuation. My English teacher would roll over in his or her grave. They're probably not dead, but if they were, But it's not like you're not making it up. It's like life's making it up and living itself through you. There's a wonderful sense of liberation and stuff in that. And how might we be together like that? Like, I'd come and listen to The Forest with you.
It was my favorite thing in the entire world.
My artifacts. I got this compass. It's kind of cool. So I used to be a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society and but I never knew where I was going. And I used to pore over the map rooms in the Royal Geographic Society, head off to the Amazon, to this little tributary. Yeah. There were aerial maps taken post-Second World War, but I knew they were inaccurate. So, I got this compass from about it's about the 1900.
Wonderful.
It's kind of cool. But I know full well that in this inner exploration, there is no direction, because there's nowhere to go. You just let the world find you.
Yes.
And I had my guitar as well here, and as my other artifact. Not that you said I should bring two, but I just, my sense of playing guitar, like I kind of made it up. I haven't really had lessons, but I play all the music on the back of films.
I didn't know you did that, actually.
Yeah, I made a film once of a guy called Dominic, who's Sting's guitarist and writing partner of many decades, and I was filming him, and I met him at an event in Apple. I was talking on filmmaking, and he was guitaring, and I said, your music would really suit what I'm doing. I'm just making up. And he said, you play. Why don't you record? Well, I don't know how. And he showed me, and I ran home. I lived in Clapham, on Clapham Common, and he was down the hill. His house was down the bottom of the hill back in Battersea. I ran up and I went home and I plugged the guitar, and I've recorded ever since then.
Wow.
So years ago. But my music has no start and no finish, really. They're just these kind of, I don't even know what I'm doing. It's a stream of consciousness, totally and utterly. I recorded for that film I was talking about, that slideshow film with the kids. I have no idea what I did. I couldn't play it again, ever. I might be able to work it out, but it just started with 2 notes, and there were 2 notes, and I liked them, and I plugged it in, and I just played something, put something over the top, and it was done. In 15 minutes, the whole thing was done, and then stuck it on this loop and stuck it on the film, and it feels the way I do, and I don't even have a name for it yet. I seldom have a name, but I like the way it sounded, so I just do that. I just make it up as you go along.
Very good.
Except it's not me making it up. It's like through me rather than by me. And maybe that's it. Through, a life through you rather than by you. And so coming back to where the words come from, that's the question. Where's it coming from?
Yes.
Where's my urge to speak? Am I talking because I need you to understand something, and by implication I'm kind of important and you think there's something in it? Or am I saying something because I want to help you? Or there's a need in it? Or am I just saying it because did I just kind of start to talk and I don't know where it's going, and I'm just kind of I'm following it? Where did it come from? It's the question. Where do words come? Where does your life come from?
Yes.
Dare you let go of the control and just let life have its way with you, and it's like you're acting on instruction almost. You're acting on feeling. You're acting because it's filled your bones. It's filled your bones with a sense of, I can't not do this. Of course, you do have a choice, and it's terrifying in a way until it's not. Until you realize, like even with the fish hook in and going down this path, and your parents still go, I don't know what you do. And by the way, mine always said the same thing. Most people don't know what I do, and I can't even. To be honest, I know I can say I'm a filmmaker. But underneath it all, it's so utterly mysterious that it's ineffable is the only ironic word I've got for it. The word for there are no words. It's ineffable. But maybe life should just be ineffable. Maybe life shouldn't be explicable and controllable. Maybe you could just let it out, and we'd be better for it. And your relationships with people would be better for it. And the things that you worked on would be in service of all rather than the few or yourself. And maybe, I don't know.
Well, I guess we should end. Once again, you reminded me. I mean, one of my favourite writers, the late great Christopher Hitchin, once said in a response to a question, where do you get your ideas from for your books or for your responses to questions? He says, I look to the numinous. And that was so powerful because he didn't have any magical thinking in him. But he trusted his mind, as he often said, to come up with the right answer, or an answer, maybe not the right answer, but an answer. Nic, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you and sharing this space with you. If people are interested in your work, where would they best seek you out?
I've got a few websites, but the main one is called Soul Biographies. SOUL, not SOLE. It's not about fish. Soulbiographies.com. Right. And there's a vast library of humans shot in that style, all shapes and sizes and races and all sorts there, and shot in this style. So there's a huge library of things there, and then I have a list that has been going since 2005 actually, and every Monday, actually it's not every Monday, sometimes I don't get round to it, but most Mondays I send out a film of, and they're short usually. Well, they're usually between 1 minute and 8 minutes, something like that. But just an experience of humanity with nothing in the way, the human soul, if you like, and some words which are really just attempting to give you an experience of nothing, really. So what I'm doing is nothing. I'm not saying we'll learn this or here's an answer. It's ready to cast you into the place, that's maybe you characterize well by saying listening to the forest, that place. So you can join that if you like. And then I do other stuff, I make films for people. And then I have these, I don't know I call them expedition retreats. And can you imagine being in front of a camera with nowhere to hide?
Yeah.
Absolutely nowhere to hide. And a bunch of people, a small group of people, all so willing to let go utterly of any sense of control. That is wild and mysterious, and it's caught on film. I do that quite a lot as well. I do lots of things. But soulbiographies.com is where it all tends to emanate from.
Nic Askew, thank you very much for coming along to Artifact Live.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I didn't mean to get invited. I just you wrote a comment on LinkedIn, I think, and then anyways, it started there. So there we go.
Fantastic, Nic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott.